Colleagues, welcome back to the office. It's Steve. Welcome to our podcast and presentation for today. This is Getting Ahead of the Emerging Technology Curve, Part 1. This is a first episode of our podcast in our new series around emerging technology. Technology is one of these things that's just constantly changing and improving and getting better and getting faster and getting smaller and getting more integrated with what we can do. And we felt it was time that we focus and provide some attention to what this incredible technology has around the corner for us and for society and for our organizations. So, in the next several episodes, over the course of a very long period of time, probably never ending, we're going to be starting to look at specific technologies from things such as artificial intelligence, big data, blockchain technology, within blockchain technology, looking at specific types of blockchains, communication services, and more, to hopefully give you the insight necessary for understanding how these technologies are going to impact your life and your organization so you can make good, effective decisions on what to do and how to do it. So this is our first episode in this new series. And in today's episode, what we are going to be talking about are technology trends, what they are and how they impact an organization, and how to identify trends which will be of particular interest and value to your organizations. Not every trend is going to be important. Not every trend is going to be useful, but it is important that we go through the process and acknowledge what these trends are so that we can make that effective decision on what we should be doing for our organizations. You just don't want to let them fly by. Now, the meat of our course today is going to be focusing on introducing blockchain technology, okay? And what is it, how does it function, and more importantly, where and how can it be used in business? I'm sure most of us have some familiarity or at least have heard in the news things like Bitcoin, Ethereum. Right now, as of the time of the recording, blockchain tech seems to be going crazy in terms of where and how this technology is being used. A lot of us, for example, have been following the price of major cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin, Ethereum, and others. And it seems to be on a very high trajectory. And what are these techs and how can they be leveraged effectively in the organization? We'll talk through, for example, a example transaction using Bitcoin. What does it look like to actually use this in business? What does it look like to receive a coin? What does it look like to send a coin? How does it actually flow through the blockchain system? And we're also going to take a look at two real-world blockchain pilot projects that are with the companies Walmart and Maersk. Walmart being one of the largest commercial companies in the world with stores worldwide in the thousands and millions of employees that sells everything from trailer supplies and paint to fresh produce. How are they using blockchain to help improve their supply chain logistics? As well as Maersk, one of the largest shipping logistic companies in the world. And how are they using blockchain to more effectively get their containers and their ships from port to port around the world? And I'll also finish with just a brief discussion about blockchain technology. Now, this is just the first of blockchain that we're going to be doing. Today, I really just want to introduce these topics, give you some good familiarity and framework with respect to where and how these technologies are used. And in future episodes of the CPE Today podcast, we're going to dive into each of those specifically, as well as many of the applications inside of it. But before you run, you need to walk, and we need to understand what these technologies are and where they're being used. Now, I do want to remind you, if you are a financial professional, and I hope you are, you can earn credit for today's podcast. It's super simple. All you have to do is listen on the platform of your choosing, either in real time as we're putting this out as part of our live stream, or at a time of your choosing on either Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and more. After you listen or watch our podcast, head on over to cpetoday.com. You take a short 5-question quiz. It'll take you 10 seconds. You'll breeze right through it, and then you will earn a credit. And when you're done, you can print out a certificate, and you'll be 1 credit closer to maintaining your licensing. Most professions have some measure of continuing education. Why not earn CPE while you listen to podcasts? So check out cpetoday.com. For today's course, please use code ETC1. Take that quick exam and you'll be well on your way to maintaining your licensing. Alrighty, let's go ahead and dive into our material for today. And we are going to discuss technology trends first, and then we're going to go ahead and dive into blockchain. Now, I love technology. If you've watched any measure of the CPE Today podcast, you've seen me discuss lots of different types of tech, and we have so much more on the horizon. And it's because what technology represents to an organization. Okay, it is truly transformative when implemented correctly. And it can take a company from a zero to a hero. It can take you from here to here. It is probably the overall fastest way for an organization to achieve success. And when implemented correctly, it allows the organization to be able to grow very quickly, where revenue can scale at one rate, but costs scale at another. Ideally, you want revenue to go up really high, but you want your costs to relatively be fixed or as low as you possibly can. Ideally, you don't want to run into this situation where your revenue and cost are moving at the same structure, and as you make more money, you have to pay more, in terms of fixed costs or variable costs. Well, tech is one of the most effective ways of being able to control that. For organizations that invest in automation, that invest in data analytics, that invest in good technology that effectively meets their needs, they have the ability to be able to grow very quickly without additional cost with it. Now, as a component of this, we really need to be thinking about not where we are today, but where are we going in the future? And having an understanding of where and how technology is going to be used in the future is how you remain competitive. And it's how you can gain a competitive advantage against your competitors in whatever market you choose to go in. There's a reason why Amazon or Microsoft or Google or ExxonMobil or Berkshire Hathaway, for that matter, are as big and as influential as they are. It's because they embrace sound business practices and they have good technology to back it up. And as the market has changed, as new trends have emerged, they've embraced them. So I want you to think about technology, and I want you to think about it over the course of your life, whether you are 17 years old or you're 65 years old or 100 years old for that matter. Think about how much has changed and how much has improved. And for most of us, myself included, technology has been in like a exponential growth. It has changed so much in my lifetime and will continue to change so much in my lifetime. And it's amazing how much has changed just in the last year. We think about coronavirus and all the horrible implications that has had on the economy, but think about how fast coronavirus improved remote access technology and cloud technology. Think about the fact that with coronavirus, it essentially leapfrogged our ability to be able to work anywhere, work from home, work from the road, probably 5 to 10 years. And that's a trend that occurred that we need to follow. So trends are the general direction in which technology is developing or changing. And ignoring these trends can be deadly to a business. Not staying current can lead to apathy among consumers. It can lead your staff to desert you and kind of follow another competitor. It could allow somebody else in the market to be able to get a foothold in a way that they previously were not able to do. Big trends are things like mobile technology. If you're not embracing mobile first in your business for your tech, you are missing the boat. I could tell you for substantially almost all of America, their primary computing device, their primary technology device is the cell phone. And so if you're optimizing your e-commerce experience for desktop users, if you're optimizing the way you expect your customers to interact with you through a desktop, you're missing an opportunity. Because yes, that might be the device they use when they're at work, but that's not the device they're primarily engaging with the rest of the world in. You need to, for example, be mobile. Likewise with social media. Social media has had a massive impact on every aspect of life, from the way that our companies will engage and will disseminate information about their products and services to the public, to how we date and find our spouses, and how we engage and talk with our friends. More people talk on Facebook or Instagram than pretty much any other method before that combined. If your organization is not embracing this, you're missing the boat. You're missing an opportunity. The average lifespan of a Fortune 500 or an S&P 500 company is less than 30 years now. And that's, in my opinion, probably directly attributable to not changing with the times and not paying attention to technology trends. Good example of this is IBM, International Business Machines, one of my favorite companies that I've admired most of my life. IBM's been around for over 100 years in technology. I mean, crazy. When IBM got started, one of their first products was a meat slicer. And you look at where they are now, it's incredible. IBM created the personal PC market in '86, but yet they are not a major hardware manufacturer today. Well, they saw the trends in terms of where the market was going, and they made some hard decisions, but they probably made the right decisions to, for example, change with the times. Don't focus on selling hardware, but rather sell software and professional services with it. Okay? So we have to see where these trends are so that we can embrace this and make effective decisions for our companies. Now, there are plenty of examples of companies that don't embrace trends, okay? Do you want to be a Research in Motion, a RIM, or do you want to be an Apple? Do you want to be a Kodak, or do you want to be a Canon? Do you want to be a MySpace, or do you want to be an Instagram and Facebook? There are plenty of examples, and you could probably think of plenty in your own industry for dinosaur companies that just did not stay current with the times. Now, one of my favorite charts and reports that I love to follow, and I'm only going to briefly mention this, is the Gartner Hype Cycle for Technologies. Okay, Gartner is a research and development company. They focus on original research on a variety of different mechanisms, whether they be in transportation or manufacturing or technologies. And one of the reports that they come out with quite regularly is what they call their Hype Cycle for Emerging Tech. And the hype cycle focuses on identifying where certain technologies are in their lifespan. Are they infant? Are they long-term? Are they really being talked about today? Are they kind of moving their way towards production and being widely adopted? Or, is this something that's maybe going to go away in the future? Well, this report comes out annually, usually around August. So this is the one we have for 2020. And what it shows is, and let's go ahead and zoom in here so you can kind of see some of this, is it has two axes. There's expectations, and then there is time. Okay. And so the expectations are, what are people talking about? How popular is this technology? And then how long until this is widely adopted? Well, if we look at this, we could see that many of the technologies that we see people talking about today, stuff like AI, data fabric, responsive systems, so on and so forth, are starting to make their way in. And we could see, for example, with this, which of these technologies are going to be 2 years out, 5 years out, or 10 or longer. Okay. Now we have our innovation trigger, which is when the idea starts. And then we have when we're starting to talk about it a lot. And then ultimately we move into what we call the plateau of productivity. And although that sounds kind of like bland, that's actually quite a good thing. In that particular sense, what that means is that technology's made it. It's something that is being wide stream adopted, and we start to see it all over the place in different capacities. If you looked at this chart 4 or 5 years ago, you would have seen things like digital voice assistants, like the Amazon Alexa services or Cortana or the Apple iPhone devices as well. Well, I mean, that stuff's pretty ubiquitous now. It's made its way pretty much everywhere. Now, for 2020 and beyond, we do have a couple of examples of leading edge technologies, things that we should be considering. And I've broken these into two major categories. Let's call it software and hardware, or computing and physical world. In the technology space, that's a really good way to be able to differentiate stuff. Things I hold and things that are physical versus things that I program and things that I interact with through a computer. On the computing side of this, it's no shock to anybody. It's going to be technology topics such as big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, blockchain, cryptocurrency, and more. Many of these topics we will be discussing and reviewing in future podcasts. In the physical world, it's going to be stuff like 3D printing. It's going to be things like LiDAR, light emitting radar, things like robotics, virtual reality, augmented reality, 5G technology, and more. And so just understanding where and how these things occur, they might be a 5-year thing, they might be a 10-year thing, but it's important to at least recognize what they could be. Now, why should you do this? It's really not a choice at this point in time. There are companies that are hungry, that are going to disrupt your business model, and you could either be the disruptor or be the disruptee. Not embracing technology will be disruptive. It could displace your company in the market. Inaction could cost you time and missed opportunity. The most expensive cost being the opportunity cost of losing out on something that you could have been the main company in. It can provide new opportunities. One of the things I like to say is that technology can reset the clock. Even if you're something of a dinosaur or old or antiquated, having breakthrough technology can change everything for your organization. A good example of this would be Apple computers. I mean, when I started high school, Apple was nothing special, and Steve Jobs had just returned back to the company. Their stock was trading in single digits, if you can believe it or not. Fast forward 25 years later, they're the most valuable company in the world with a market cap larger than ExxonMobil. Who would have ever thought that a tech company could outweigh an oil producer? But in fact, if we look at the largest companies in the world, they're almost always tech firms now. You know why? Because technology can change everything. There are plenty of examples of organizations that have displaced traditional businesses. For example, we've had hospitality like Hilton and Marriott for years. But yet, why is there an Airbnb and why are they so successful? Aerospace, traditionally one of the most difficult industries to break into. Companies with long-standing traditions such as Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and more. But yet there is a SpaceX who's absolutely setting the world on fire with their space travel. SpaceX has brought the cost of an orbital mission down fivefold, the average cost being about $100 million before. Now, with the reusable rocket technology, it's down to about $20 million to put something into orbit. We've had cab companies, whether they be private cabs or yellow cabs for years, but yet when I think about getting a ride somewhere, I don't think about calling a cab. I think about ordering one on my phone through either Lyft or Uber. Why the yellow cab companies didn't lead this charge, I can only think it was just because of their inability to adapt and their inability to embrace technology trends. It's hard to say what trends are going to pay off and what will and what won't, but you should at least acknowledge them and you should at least consider them for their impact to your organization. Alrighty, let's have our first review question. Alrighty, so which are benefits of embracing emerging technology in your organization? Okay, is it the opportunity to reset the clock of your business? Absolutely. That is a way to be able to turn back the clock and start anew. Doesn't matter how old your business is. Having a good presence in the market, having something already there, and then improving it is always better than starting from scratch. Opportunity to quickly gain a competitive advantage. Absolutely. If you think about, in terms of what technology can do, it's a way to leapfrog your competitors if you have a better, more efficient, more cost-effective way of being able to do something. It can often reduce cost and improve efficiency. Absolutely. Organizations that embrace tech can easily accomplish both of those. So I'm going to go ahead and say here, it is all of the above. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and dive in to our main topic for today and our first embracing technology that we are going to review, which is blockchain and cryptocurrency. So, blockchain and cryptocurrency is a big topic. These are absolutely cutting edge in terms of what they do and the impact that they can have for the business, whether they be around their record keeping, whether they be around how they will do international trade, whether how they pay their employees in the future. There's a lot of different things that you can do with this tech, and it's really exciting to see that this start to take off and start to gain hold. Now, I'm going to talk through where blockchain is actually being used. We're going to talk through some specific misconceptions that people have, but I want to focus on something real quick. I think that these topics, while interrelated to each other, we really, as accountants, as financial professionals, need to embrace blockchain more than cryptocurrency. They kind of go hand in hand, and you can't have one without the other in some respects, but I often think that cryptocurrency is the least interesting of this topic. I think there's a lot more to blockchain than cryptocurrency itself. And so I'm going to try to explain both of these, but I really want to take a different approach than maybe other videos and other podcasts will, where they kind of just generally focus on the hype around the price of Bitcoin. And so we're probably not going to mention that much, at least in this section, but rather what is blockchain and what could this technology actually do for businesses? Okay. Now, to understand blockchain, you need to at least recognize how transactions are processed today in normal financial institutions in a normal business. Currently, when we need to do something, what we end up doing is we use a trusted middleman, like a bank or a credit card company, to process a transaction. Okay. Or it could be like a cloud provider in terms of somebody sitting in the middle. Okay. Either way, there's somebody sitting in the middle that's charging a fee for their services, either a percentage of the transaction, or it could be a set fee depending on what the nature of the transaction is doing. Okay. So in the case of a financial transaction, let's say it's a $100 transaction, the bank might take anywhere from $3 to $5, depending on the specific terms of that transaction, to process it. Now, for that fee, they take money out of one account, they move it to another account, and they provide various assurance services, such as fraud prevention, along the way. But there's a middleman. Okay. Now, with blockchain, it's a little bit different. Instead of having a middleman, we work with a distributed ledger in a distributed environment where instead of working with a specific company, we work with a technology that actually does the facilitation and trust and assurance services for us. We can connect the seller and the buyer directly together, and they can conduct business directly. Instead of having a company in the middle, the blockchain is in the middle there. So it doesn't change the nature of the transactions. People are still buying and selling things, but it changes the nature of how that transaction is processed and who does that actual processing. Okay. So this idea that we can connect people directly together will allow us to be able to do more business at a lower cost of operation. Now, all blockchain will use some measure of cryptography, although it varies depending on what specific blockchain technology you're using. But they all work around the idea of encryption and cryptography. That is how we can keep things secure. That's how the blockchain is able to provide a decentralized database and ledger that everybody can work with and examine. And in public blockchains, and we'll talk more about public blockchains and private blockchains here in a minute, in a public blockchain, all aspects of that actual transaction, date, addresses, amounts, in terms of the information that was exchanged, is public. If you, for example, process a transaction on Bitcoin or Ethereum, anybody in the world can use what's called a chain explorer, and they can see the nature of that transaction, where the crypto originated, where it went, what block it was part of, and also the quantity of what was exchanged or what information was exchanged along with it. Now, an important thing with public blockchains and even private blockchains to a degree as well, it's this idea of consensus. Now, this is where a lot of people kind of get screwed up with respect to blockchain. They just think, well, how is it fraud resistant? How can you just work with this? Well, it's this idea of a consensus protocol that in order for a transaction to be added to the blockchain, it has to be correct. It has to meet certain cryptography standards. And in fact, when we add something to the blockchain, we have to have consensus amongst the users that this was an appropriate transaction, this person had the authority to commit this action, and that it is cryptography correct in terms of the information that is exchanged. Now, another major aspect of blockchain technology is permanence. When you commit something to the blockchain, it is written in stone. It essentially will exist in perpetuity from today forevermore. When something is added to the blockchain, it is permanent and can never be modified. You can't update it. You can't correct it. You could certainly write another transaction to update, but it would exist as one too. It would not be, hey, I went back and I adjusted a prior period entry. You can't do that with blockchain. Blockchain, by its very design, is permanent. And because the ledger itself is decentralized, it can't be modified. And you can always tell when somebody is fraudulently trying to commit something to the blockchain. Now, there are a couple of misconceptions that I want to address immediately so that we can get our facts right around blockchain and cryptocurrency. Okay? All cryptocurrency is blockchain technology, but not all blockchain is cryptocurrency. Okay? Cryptocurrencies are going to be things like your Bitcoin, your Ethereum, your Litecoin, your IOTA, and more. Cryptocurrency, one of the ways you can think about it, it's typically a store of value in the same way that if I have a $100 bill in my wallet, well, I have $100 of units that I can use to go buy milk, eggs, or whatever else I choose to use. Bitcoin's the same way. It's a store of value. So with that store of value, I can choose to spend that Bitcoin however I choose to, whether it be buying a pizza or sending money to a family member overseas without having to go through a company like Western Union or something else. However, blockchain's more than that. Blockchain is a ledger type transaction, and we will talk more about that here in a minute in terms of what the blocks and the blockchain represents, but think of it as being a ledger. It's a record-keeping system in the same way that accounting is a record-keeping system with double entries. You have debits, you have credits. Same thing with blockchain, but think of it as being accounting 2.0. I think at a very deep level, when this technology is fully embraced, it will be revolutionary to how we build accounting systems and will bring an unparalleled level of trust and authenticity and security to our accounting. But we're not there today. This technology is still very infant. So there are lots of implementations of blockchain. It's way more than just Bitcoin. And while it is the largest, there are lots of other types of blockchains that you should be familiar with. One that we're going to talk about today is one called Hyperledger Fabric, originally brought to market by IBM, which is a private blockchain where you can get all the features and functions and all the stuff I'm talking about without having to be in the cryptocurrency market. So it's a great way, for example, to track supply chain, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So don't think blockchain is just limited to the price of Bitcoin. It is a much bigger world out there. It's more than just trading cryptocurrency. There are a lot of really interesting world applications where trust is the priority. I need a way of doing international business. I need a way of transmitting information. I need a way of assurance where I don't know the other person. Blockchain can provide that in ways that traditional technologies just can't. Now, the other big misconception is, well, if I work with Bitcoin or Ethereum, all my information is just out there. Yes, that's a public blockchain. That is a feature. That is not a bug of what you get. People who interact with public blockchains want it for that very reason, that transparency and the ability that anybody can interact with that particular technology. However, again, it's not just public blockchains. There are private blockchains that you can utilize for institutional and business use. So you can get all the features you love. However, it is your technology, it's your deployment, and you get control over who can interact with and who has access to the ledger. So if you want to utilize blockchain technology without having to make all your information private, realize you totally can. Okay, so where is blockchain needed? Now, I'm not a maximalist in the sense that everybody, there's these technology folks that, want to solve every problem with blockchain, or every problem with AI or every problem with big data. I'm not one of those guys. I like technology for the sake of improving an organization, not just because it's a different way of doing something. Okay. As such, I think there are some specific real world use cases where blockchain tech is needed and where it can be very effective. And this doesn't apply to everything. This is not, if you have a hammer, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. These are real world things that I think blockchain can improve very quickly and can also add a lot of value in a way that current technology just can't. So blockchain tech can be really useful when we need to store information in a way that we can see if it's been tampered, and we also need to know the time. Okay, so where would it be useful to know if somebody tampered with the information being stored and when they did certain things? Well, think about insurance. Okay, think about insurance in the sense of like you never need it until you need it, and you always need it ahead of time. You can't really get it after the fact. Well, we could use blockchain, for example, as a great way of facilitating insurance in our organizations. I had a really, if you think about your when you do business with people, you need to verify, do they have the proper coverage? Do they have the proper licensing? Do they have the bonds? So on and so forth. And how do you actually know they have the bonds or the insurance policy that they have? Well, if we use the public blockchain, they could give you an address that would essentially represent their insurance policy, and you could verify. And because of the nature of blockchain, you know that that policy is in effect and can't be changed. So after the fact, you can't, that person couldn't go back in and update or change that insurance policy to include or exclude specific things because, it's permanent. I have a very dear friend and colleague, and hopefully future guest on the CP Today podcast, who was working on a project for blockchain-based insurance for cars, where essentially the blockchain would write the insurance policy, and when the car was in motion, the policy would be in effect. And depending on how you were driving, it could automatically adjust between a high-cost and low-cost insurance policy. So if it was parked in the garage, it would switch to the low-cost policy. But if it was driving through a rough neighborhood, it would automatically switch to the high-cost policy, to properly provide the right assurance for that use case. The benefit being you pay for what you need, and it is automatically done. You put money in the blockchain, insurance policy kicks in. It's kind of a really interesting use case, and I really hope he considers bringing that product to market. Think about contracts, agreements, okay? Real estate acceptance, the cost of title insurance. We'll talk about title here in a little bit, but if we were to use blockchain for e-signature documents, this would be a very good way of being able to provide assurance that that document and contract did not change. You could look it up at any point on the blockchain and see exactly that document and know that because it was written to the blockchain, it's permanent and can never be modified. So a really good way to maybe conduct agreements and contracts with folks. Okay, places where parties don't know each other and they need a way of being able to trust each other and have forensically unalterable, tamper-evident data storage. Try saying that 5 times fast. Okay. In this particular instance, think about international business and think about the cost of doing international business, especially around manufacturing. Let's say I come up with an idea, I want to bring it to market, and getting something made overseas can be quite expensive for both sides. The manufacturer, for example, they have to do tooling, they have to bring in people, raw materials. They want to know they get paid, and at the same time, I want to know I'm going to get what I ordered. I also want to know they're not going to steal my intellectual property. Well, if we were to use the blockchain, we could, for example, put all the data inside of that blockchain in what's called a smart contract. We're not going to discuss that today, but what you do need to know about a smart contract is that it is a way of being able to programmatically write a contract that if both sides do what they say they are going to do, the contract executes. If one side changes or doesn't fulfill the terms of the agreement, the contract will be rendered null and certain actions can be and remediation can take place there. Okay. Well, in this particular example, it makes it a lot easier to be able to do business because there's skin in the game. There's, essentially enforcement without having to bring in law enforcement or courts or anything else. And so I could write a smart contract where I put a certain amount of money in escrow. Okay. I provide the documentation. They provide the products in terms of what I would like manufactured. And everybody does what they say they're going to do. That contract will execute, the manufacturer gets paid, and I get the product that I have requested. And we're all happy because the terms have been diligently and completely followed. So this is a great way in terms of being able to work with people that you don't maybe know directly overseas, around the world, somewhere else, be able to conduct business at a much lower price than it would be, having to fly over there, establish relationships, getting letters of credit with your bank, reference letters, things of this nature. That's all still good, but this is just another option available to you. Blockchain technology is also really useful where the sequence of records is important. Okay, and I mentioned deeds and trust and title before of this. Okay, think about easements, for example, or think about garnishments if we're talking about payroll. Sequence of things is important. What happened first, what happened second, third, fourth, so on and so forth. When you go to buy a piece of property, one of the biggest costs that you will incur is title insurance. Somebody has to go through the county records, ensure that whoever's selling you this is selling what they have access to and what they have rights to. I'm reminded by the fact that in the last century, somebody actually successfully sold the Eiffel Tower twice, even though they had no business doing so. Well, why? Because, there was no title check back then. And this has happened before. I've got a bridge I got a bridge I can sell you, kind of a thing. Well, imagine if we were to move title, property ownership to something like blockchain, where, or even for that matter, let's say custodianship of any product or any equipment for that matter, where you could look at the blockchain address and immediately know that this person owns this property or they have access to this property. Things like garnishments or easements could be really easy at this point because it would just be written as part of that record, and we would know. You could instantly do a title check on something just to see if it is correct or if they have access to it or if not. You can look that stuff up almost instantaneously. And in fact, we're going to talk about a case study here in a minute with Walmart, where they were using the Hyperledger Fabric to bring transparency and security to their food supply chain. And this is a major component of it, the sequence and time of when events occurred. So lots of different ways that you could utilize these technologies. But ultimately, what I want you to think about blockchain is I need a way of exchanging information where it is where there's a tamper evident ledger, where it's not easy in terms of people being able to fraudulently misrepresent themselves. And we want to be able to store information in a time sequence manner. Okay. So this gives us all of these technologies and so much more. Now, another major tenet of blockchain and cryptocurrency technology is decentralization and distributed. Okay. You'll often hear these terms used simultaneously with each other. Okay, with cryptocurrency, with blockchain, we do not have one central record system. That record system is spread across, in the case of a public blockchain, millions of users that all have a copy of the record. So there's no like one master database where all this information is kept. And if that central database is corrupted, lost, or stolen, we lose all that data. Everybody who chooses to participate in a public blockchain from a mining perspective has access to this. As such, that means there's no central responsible party, no central point of authority. In a way, major public blockchains like Ethereum, like Bitcoin, they're kind of autonomous. I mean, they just continue to operate and exist. Whether a certain government or whether a certain business likes it or not, I mean, these technologies are here. They're also distributed in the sense that the work is being shared across the people who actually use the platform and actually use this. So if you choose to engage with a public blockchain like Bitcoin, like Ethereum, you're part of this. You can have a copy of the ledger, and you can also be part of the actual processing of itself. This is in direct contrast to existing financial markets and existing banking structures where there is a central hub, whether it be Wells Fargo, whether it be Bank of America, but they are the master record keeper. They set the rules, they set the tone, and everybody else just follows. Okay. In a blockchain environment, all that information is spread around the world to whoever chooses to use the system. And if you use it, you're part of it. Now, two big things with respect to blockchain. Okay. You have block and you have blockchain. And this is something also people kind of get screwed up on in terms of the technology meanings of this, okay? Blocks and blockchains. Well, and actually one other one, you'd have transactions, okay? So in a second, we're going to take a look at what a blockchain transaction would look like. But you have an individual transaction. Let's just say, for example, I'm going to send money to my good friend Alex, okay? So I'm going to send him some Bitcoin. Well, I would initiate that transaction, okay? That transaction would get added to a block, okay? I want you to think of a block as being a page of a ledger. Okay, think of a big book, think of a big ledger, you got debits and credits. Okay, that transaction would be a single line item on a page of that ledger. Okay, and that ledger page is a block. The block represents a batch of transactions. Now, when that batch of transactions is processed, that is through the process of mining, which we'll talk about here in a moment. Okay. And when that process is completed, it is added to the blockchain, which is the permanent, non-editable ledger of all transactions. So within a blockchain, there are blocks. Those blocks represent the individual pages of a transaction. And inside of a block, there could be several, sometimes hundreds or thousands of individual transactions. And as they move through the system, those blocks get processed. And when they are processed, they are added to the blockchain. Now, as I mentioned before, not all blockchains are equal. We have public blockchains and we have private blockchains. Okay. So with a private blockchain, that means that users themselves are not In a public blockchain, that means that users are independent. That means that they have access to any aspect of the technology itself. They can update any of that technology. They can update and process their own transactions. And there's no kind of central authority with respect to who can interact with and who can move with that particular technology. Meaning that if it is a public blockchain, anybody has access to it, anybody can request a copy of the ledger, anybody can process a transaction through it. Now, this is in contrast to a private blockchain. This would be what I would recommend for our institutions, organizations that are looking to get the benefits of the blockchain without actually putting their information out there being public. So realize there's a difference between them. Things like, for example, Bitcoin, Ethereum, those are public blockchains. Private blockchains are going to be like Hyperledger Fabric. And that's going to be what you'd want to use inside of your company if you want the benefits of blockchain without having to make all your information public. Now, let's look at an example of a Bitcoin transaction as it processes through. And in this, we're also going to talk about, for example, mining transactions and how that occurs. Okay, Bob wants to send Acme Company 1 Bitcoin to purchase some equipment. As of the taping of today's podcast, 1 Bitcoin would be roughly over $60,000. So he must be buying a Tesla or something. He's buying something big. And that transaction, when initiated, will immediately be executed and sent to the Bitcoin blockchain for verification. Okay, that will be added to a specific block. That block is then broadcast out to what are called miners that will then process the transaction. Okay, so let's talk about what it means to actually process these transactions and how do we verify it. Well, how do we verify it? We do this through mining. Okay, miners are independent, worldwide, and disinterested of each other. Miners can be anybody. Anybody can buy the technology, the hardware to be able to mine. And what they do is they take those blocks and they settle the transactions, okay? And so they verify the details of a transaction that occur, and so they will take that block and they're going to look at the ledger and they're going to say, okay, well, Bob had a balance of 10 Bitcoin. Okay, well, we're going to take 1. He has a balance of 10, so we know he doesn't have a negative balance. He presented the correct security credentials, so he has access to these funds. We're going to move 1 Bitcoin from Bob's account to Acme's account. And so the process of mining is the process of settling. It's a process of moving from one account to the other. Okay, and so these miners, they get paid for this through transaction fees and then also a reward for settling the transaction. Now, these miners, they're going to look at the transaction. They're held to very strict cryptographic standards. If the transaction does not meet those standards, if it's a fraudulent transaction, it's immediately discarded. Okay. Now, transactions will initially be verified by a single miner, but over the course of a couple of hours, then ultimately days, that transaction will be verified by thousands and then ultimately millions of miners. And it's like they all look at that transaction. They say, yep, Bob did it correctly. He had the money. He can move it over there. Yep, he did it correct. Yep, he did it correct. And all of them will essentially come to this consensus that this is, in fact, a valid transaction. And once that transaction is verified, that block is added to the chain. And then once it's added to that blockchain, it is permanent, it's not editable, and it's transparent for anybody who chooses to go look at it. Now, once that transaction is verified many times, Acme would see that Bitcoin deposited in their wallet. Okay, just like your normal wallet where you keep your credit cards and your ID and some cash. In cryptocurrency world, you would also have a wallet, and that wallet represents your address in the system. In the same way you have an IP address for your computer or a physical address for your mailing, you have a Bitcoin address which represents your specific place in the blockchain. You would see, in this case, Acme would see 1 additional Bitcoin added to their wallet. Acme would see their Bitcoin balance increase. Bob would see his balance decrease correspondingly for the amount of the transaction. Now, you can't double spend. Bob can't send that exact Bitcoin to another person without the system flagging it. Once that Bitcoin transaction is committed, it's done, it's there. Bob can't send a second transaction. If he did, it would be discarded because you can't send the same coin twice. Now, it's important, and this is kind of something that breaks the brain of a lot of accountants, okay? That we're always striving to get things right and accurate. And that often can require a lot of work. I think we can all think of times at, midnight or later where we've been screaming trying to get this balance sheet to balance and it just doesn't want to. Well, in the blockchain world, everything is always in balance, as it's mathematically not possible to be out of balance. Something happens, there's a corresponding action elsewhere. So the system is always in balance with each other. So that's part of the design standards. That's just how blockchain works. And you just kind of have to accept that as a standard of what this technology can provide. Okay, so what does this mean for accountants? What does this mean to financial professionals? Well, let's put on our big hat here and think, long term. Let's think about a year in the future, okay? Or 10 years in the future, even longer than that. Let's think about how we could maybe potentially integrate this permanent ledger system that is tamper evident and time sensitive. What could this potentially mean to the technology for financial professionals? Well, if you're an auditor, this could bring a extremely high level of trust in your audit work. You could essentially know that the data behind the numbers that you're looking at could not have been fraudulently added to the system, that you couldn't have, for example, somebody go and do a prior period adjustment, that somebody couldn't have taken a transaction that was committed, a year ago and update that balance or update that name of that check or update that account to something else. It brings a high level of trust if that accounting system for your particular audit engagement was blockchain based. Think about intercompany transaction. Well, this would be a great way of being able to track transactions between entities because it could be verifiable. If it was intercompany, for example, I could see parent and child easily exchanging information, and I would see that transaction perfectly reflected in both systems. It would always be matching because, again, that's one of the central principles of blockchain is that it has to be in balance. It has to match. And so this would be great for being able to track something from start to finish, where something originated to where something ended. It provides integrity of electronic record keeping because all changes are permanent, irreversible, and you know where it came from. You can't just add an anonymous record to the system. You'd have to have a signature to that particular transaction, and you could track, in the case of a private blockchain, who that signature belongs to, who that address belongs to. And so it's a very effective way of providing a high degree of trust. All right, let's go ahead and have our second review question for the day. All righty here. So, what is the process of settling transactions and moving funds from one account to the other called? Is it staking? No, it is not staking. Staking is a newer concept with respect to blockchain, which we're going to talk about when we get to our Ethereum course. Ethereum is moving from what they call proof of work to proof of stake, and there's a whole another protocol that we can use to verify transactions. But today, it's really more a idea than anything else, so it's not widely adopted. So it's not that. Is it mining? Yes, substantially all cryptocurrencies use mining as their consensus protocol in a way of verifying transactions. Private blockchain works a little bit different. Is it blockchain? No, that's just the technology itself, and it is none of the above. That is also not the correct answer. Our correct answer here is mining. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and talk through, in the time that we have left here, a couple of real-world examples of where blockchain is being used, okay? So, as I mentioned, you have public blockchains and private blockchains. Public blockchains primarily being the cryptocurrency markets, but we have this whole idea of a private blockchain that your company could set up their own blockchain to track goods, services, people's, events, whatever, throughout a system and being able to provide a high degree of trust and verifiability of the data itself, okay? So let's think about it in the context of supply chain, and let's look at food as an example, okay? I'm primarily going to focus here on the United States because that's what I know, but this is pretty representative worldwide. In a lot of ways, our food system is distributed. It is decentralized. Food moves through commerce in a huge network, and it's very antiquated, a lot of paper-based stuff. Even though parts are digitized, a lot of it is isolated from system to the system, and the quality and verifiability and tracking will vary greatly company to company, supplier to supplier, country to country. And so it's not very, very well set up. Now, here in the United States, we have the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. Now, from the FDA perspective, they're the ones, the FDA and the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, are the ones primarily responsible for inspecting food and meat and produce and things of this nature. And they're the ones that are the primary enforcement and policy-making organizations here in the United States. And at the time of the recording, for the most part, the FDA only requires one step forward and one step backwards in traceability. So, if I'm a store, for example, I need to know where I bought the lettuce, where I bought the bacon, where I got my meat, but I don't need to know, for example, where my supplier got it or what farm it actually originated. I would say in the sense of, being thorough and being qualified and, kind of doing things in the right way, that would be a good thing to know. This whole idea of farm to table, I think, is very appealing for people who want to have, know what they're putting in their body. But that at the time of this recording is not legally required. Okay. So in the last couple of years, we've had numerous examples of E. coli breakout in produce. Romaine lettuce is a good example of this. And in 2019, we had 53 people in 16 states that were infected with an E. coli infection. Okay, this took weeks, thousands of hours of time, going through hundreds, if not thousands of documents, trying to trace what farm this infected lettuce originated from. And the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, actually could not find a single supplier. And ultimately, they recommended to the FDA that all romaine lettuce be disposed of, which is crazy because ultimately, I'm sure it came from one region, maybe even one farm. But because there's not a lot of verifiability in the food system, there's not a lot of ways to trace this, you got to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So Walmart decided to conduct a case study to see how blockchain could potentially improve this. Okay, Walmart has 12,000 stores, tens of thousands of suppliers. They are certainly one of the largest companies in the United States, in the world. And so they got together with some of their other big company pals, including Dole, Driscoll, Tyson, and others, to kind of build a way of being able to more easily share information about food in their logistics networks. Okay, they wanted to be able to trace something that was being sold in their store to where that food ultimately originated, what farm it came from, what ranch it came from, and be able to summarize every step along the way. So they conducted 2 pilot tests, one with mangoes here in the United States and another one with pork in China. Okay, they used the private blockchain, IBM Hyperledger Fabric, as the actual technology for this. Okay, Hyperledger Fabric is a private permission-based blockchain, and they provisioned it so that every piece that would move through the system would have a unique 6-character lot number representing what it is. And that lot number could be then used by any Walmart employee on any computer in their network to be able to trace where that particular item originated. And you might think, for example, like, Steve, how is this any different than a database? You're right, it's not. However, when you start talking about blockchain, it's about independence. It's about verifiability. By basing this in blockchain, we've essentially said that this is correct. This data is not changeable. Walmart or Dole or Driscoll couldn't cover up something after the fact just because something bad happened. There's a high degree of trust that the information that's being recorded in this blockchain system is correct. Additionally, by decentralizing it through the blockchain, Walmart was able to introduce Dole, Driscoll, Tyson, and others into this, where essentially it's a kind of, a centralized, not a centralized, but a non-company specific way of being able to trace this. It's not Walmart's technology. It's not Dole's technology. It's the technology, and we all just choose to interact with it. It's a standard in a way. Well, they had great success with this pilot project. They used mangoes and then they used pork. In the mango test, previously it would take Walmart on average about 7 days to trace a pack of sliced mangoes to the farm of origin. Okay. And it was all paper-based. It would all have to go back to their main office and literally somebody flipping through files to determine where something originated. With the move to blockchain and the move to lot numbers and making this information digital, we went from almost 7 days of traceability down to instantaneously in 2.2 seconds. Similar results in their Chinese test. With pork, they had 100% accuracy tracing pork back to its origin with the similar speed of the mangoes. Okay, so as an example, what did this look like inside of blockchain? What did it look like for Walmart? Okay, well, after an employee entered a lot number, okay, it would identify the pack as being a mango lot number. And from there, they were able to identify various key data, what type of mangoes they were, when they were particularly harvested, by where, and also by whom in some respects. Okay, you can also see when it was transported, so we can see it was picked on the 24th, on the 25th, it went through a hot water treatment to exterminate bugs. Okay, on the 27th, it was imported. It went through customs on the 29th. Okay, it entered, let's say, a processing plant on May 1st. It was cut and harvested. It was cut and packaged and then ultimately moved into a Walmart store. And the blockchain essentially will record all these actions that the consumer then has a high degree of trust knowing where the food came from, was it properly handled. The blockchain, for example, could also record things like what truck it went on, how long did it sit, what temperature was it being stored at, things of this nature that would be useful to the discerning customer. So what did this allow Walmart to be able to do? Well, blockchain allowed them to overcome antiquated technology that is traditionally found in the grocery supply chain. This allowed them to be able to potentially grow this technology to expand infinitely. They stock on average 50,000 items. Imagine spreading this technology to the entire supply chain for not only food, but all of their products. It helped overcome the complexity of many-to-many relationships in the grocery business. A supplier will often have many customers, and a customer will often have many suppliers. Well, those are traditional problems for databases to being able to overcome. Not so hard on a blockchain level. So overall, it was a great way for them to be able to overcome some of the issues traditionally found in a food supply chain. Now, Maersk also had a similar project. Maersk, one of the largest shipping companies in the world, they've got big ships all over the world, transporting millions of containers to hundreds of ports all over. They did a similar project also using Hyperledger Fabric. Okay. And what they were able to do with this is be able to get a full 360 perspective of their shipping process in collaboration with their partners, including DuPont, Dow Chemicals, and others, U.S. Customs, Netherlands Customs. This allowed them to be able to get a complete view of where everything was in their logistic network. So the process of goods, it allowed them, for example, to instantly be able to track a container, what equipment, what boat, what people were involved with it. And from a customs perspective, this is a great way, for example, to exchange sensitive information like a bill of lading and customs importation documents. A lot easier with the highest degree of trust using blockchain. All right, so let me give you some thoughts looking forward on this particular technology. Okay, I think, again, we're kind of really far out there and we should be excited for a lot of different reasons. Banks, IT professional accountants, we're all excited about this, but for different reasons. Some central banks are kind of experimenting with blockchain as a way of maybe a 21st century currency in a way that might be easier and more traceable, for things like money laundering and fraud using things like blockchain. If I was the SEC, if I was FinCEN and others, this could be a way of kind of enforcing better laws and regulations regarding money laundering and other things like that as well. However, we're still pretty far behind this in terms of where this technology might be. On the technology side of this, it's pretty amazing for what this could bring to international business and what this could ultimately bring to like supply chain or deeds, trusts, even contracts and agreement. Some things that I'm watching for, things like deed registry. There are a variety of agencies here in the United States as well as abroad that are investigating this for title and properties. In Cook County, Illinois, they're actually looking at this technology as well. I think what IBM is doing with the private blockchain technology for supply chains and private accounting systems could be really compelling as well. So there's lots of really kind of good stuff coming from here. However, people are excited for different reasons. I'm excited from the technology perspective because I think it's really, really cool and compelling to use. So at the end of the day, what I will say is blockchain, cryptocurrency, these are cutting edge technologies. They are still in their infancy. They're about 10 years old at this point, but by no means have we reached maturity or peak saturation. I think it's coming, but it could be 5 years or longer. Now, if you want to immediately dismiss this idea, think about, for example, what you thought about the internet in 96 and compare it to today. The internet is probably the most important technology ever to occur. It was an absolute revolution with respect to communication. And it took 20 years, but now it has completely changed the way we buy things, the way that we meet our friends and communicate with our friends, the way we conduct business, and I think blockchain has a very similar use case and growth pattern. It's not something for 2021. Think about it in 2040 and what this could be. It's a long-term technology. It's going to take time to gain mainstream adoption, but it does have the opportunity to potentially change the world. Okay. At the moment, it's very speculative, especially on the cryptocurrency market. It's very volatile. It's changing constantly, but there are marketable and noticeable improvements year to year. And there are successes that are occurring year to year. So just don't discount it, understand it. And I really look forward to in future podcasts diving into individual blockchains, individual cryptocurrencies, individual aspects of this technology, and discussing how we can leverage it in our organizations. Alrighty, let's go ahead and have our final review question for today. Which blockchain platform was utilized for both the Walmart and Maersk pilot projects? Was it Bitcoin? Oops. Oh, let's go back there. Was it Bitcoin? No. Was it Ethereum? No. Was it IBM Hyperledger Fabric? Yes, it was, and it was not Litecoin. The IBM Hyperledger Fabric being the only private blockchain represented in this group of slides, although it is not the only private blockchain. There are many other examples which we'll discuss in the future. So what did we learn today? Okay, we talked about trends and the importance of incorporating technology into your organizations, or at least understanding what the potential impact could be. We did an overview of blockchain technology, including how transactions are processed and moved through the system. And we looked at a couple of real-world examples from Walmart and Maersk about how blockchain is being used in a non-cryptocurrency way. In the future, we're going to be looking at a lot of things around blockchain and cryptocurrency. As I mentioned, a lot of the specific types of cryptocurrency and a lot of the specific technology. But this series is so much more. We're going to be peppering in and bringing in a lot of different cutting edge future tech that you should be considering, whether it be things like around artificial intelligence, big data, robotics, next generation communication, and so much more. So stay tuned. If you're interested in emerging tech and the impact that it will have on the financial profession, this is definitely the series for you. Well, that does bring us to the end of our podcast for today. I do want to remind you, if you are a financial professional, you can earn a CPE credit for listening to our podcast for today. It's super simple. Head on over to cpetoday.com, use course code ETC1, take a short 5-question quiz. It'll take you 2 seconds, and you will earn a credit. You can even print off a certificate and hang it on your wall if you'd like. And you'll be 1 credit closer to maintaining your professional license. Bunch of other cool stuff come along with it, including DRM free copies of the learning materials. You can even ask questions and participate if you so desire. We really appreciate you coming, watching, and listening. If you like our content, please consider connecting with us on social media. You can find us on almost every channel at CPE Today. You can find us on YouTube, Twitter, and more. We'd love for you to leave a comment or a review of our content if you'd like. And you can also listen to the CPE Today podcast on the platform of your choosing at the time of your choosing. You can find our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and more. We'd love for you to consider subscribing to us and leave a comment if you'd like. We're a growing business. Every little bit helps, and we sure appreciate whatever support you can provide. It is an absolute pleasure being with you here today. I love teaching, love presenting this material to you, and I very much hope to see you again the next time around. Best wishes. Good luck.